Everyone remembers the day when Sepé Tiaraju rode out onto the marshes. Not as a myth, but as a living man who tried to hold a people to the only home they had ever known. This is a true-life horror from the middle of the 18th century, set against the slow, bureaucratic violence of empires. In 1750, Spain and Portugal signed the Treaty of Madrid, redrawing borders across South America in ink and royal seals. On paper, it was a diplomatic solution. On the ground, it was a death sentence for the Jesuit reductions. Settlements in the upper Uruguay, where Guaraní communities, shepherded by Jesuit missionaries, had built towns, farms, and churches for generations. The crown's mapmakers and court ministers saw land and imperial order. Ranchers and colonial officials saw opportunity. The Guaraní saw betrayal. The treaty ordered the transfers of territory and demanded that the reductions east of the Uruguay River be handed to Portugal and their inhabitants relocated. The Jesuits argued for protection. The Guaraní refused to leave the lands they had cleared and consecrated. Sepé Tiaraju emerged as the Guaraní's most visible leader. He was not a guerrilla fantasist. He was a commander and a symbol, a man of faith who had learned to speak to both Indian councils and to Jesuit priests. His resistance was at once spiritual and practical, centered on preserving a settled life that Spanish and Portuguese officials treated as disposable. What followed was not a fair fight. Colonial governors convened a joint Luso-Spanish expedition. The armies that marched against the reductions carried not just muskets and cannon, but the legal weight of Europe. Promises had been made in royal chambers. Those promises became orders and then bullets. The supposed diplomacy that had sealed the Treaty of Madrid masked a plainer conspiracy. Imperial sovereignty prioritized maps over human communities, and local elites coveted land, now deemed theirs by treaty. Jesuit attempts to protect their people were sidelined by the march of soldiers with orders to enforce the border. The most infamous clash came on February 7, 1756, at Caiboaté. Sepé and a few thousand Guaraní, men, women, and boys, met a coalition of Spanish and Portuguese troops backed by artillery. Contemporary accounts and later chronicles describe a scene of sudden rupture. Churches smoldering, wooden houses razed, the leveled crops of a season gone. The Guaraní fought with spears and the muskets given by Jesuits. The empire fought with trained cavalry and coordinated tactics. When the smoke cleared, the reductions lay broken. Hundreds, by many estimates over 1,000, of Guaraní lay dead or missing. Sepé himself was killed in the fighting, his body a precise end to a stubborn resistance. But the horror lingered beyond the battlefield. The massacre at Caiboaté was not simply military defeat, it was the enforced erasure of a way of life. Survivors were scattered, plantations and estancias later took root on the lands they had tended. Jesuits would be expelled from the Spanish Americas a decade later in 1767, and the colonial state marched on, remaking landscapes into commodities. To this day, the Guaraní revolt and Sepé's death are taught as a tragic episode of that era. But what makes it true-life horror is the pattern. A treaty signed where the human consequences were never seen. Officials who treated people as movable pieces, and a brutal, efficient violence that turned community to ruin under the guise of lawful order. Documentary evidence, letters, royal decrees, military reports, and Jesuit accounts shows the deliberate sequence: diplomatic agreement, local enforcement, military annihilation. The conspiracy was not some whispered plot in a tavern. It was the legal machinery of empire. Theirs was a horror of policy and proclamation, a horror that cost lives and made ghosts out of settlements. Sepé Tiaraju remains a symbol, a mournful figure on the borderlands of history. The marsh where he fell still remembers. The real horror is that it was preventable, a treaty that could have accounted for peoples, a crown that could have chosen protection over profit, an empire that might have listened. Instead, paper decided the fate of flesh.